there's one other thing that I wanted to go over on this stream that is longer than this one. I'm sure that I'm going to go through the whole thing because I think that the whole thing is like half an hour. But so, how many of you guys know who Michael Knowles is? I suspect that most of you probably do. He is one of those guys that's kind of in the sort of Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk kind of mold, like these sort of people. Um, he's really he's definitely a little more fashy than most, and he's definitely a character. Now, what I wanted to show you about him is, let's see, I wanted to show you this video. It's called "The Fall of Rome 2.0," and this just came out like a few days ago, and he has this interview with someone who used to be in the Trump White House. So, yeah, and is very, very, very interesting. All right, so let's see what Michael Knowles has to say here.
Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to know that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. We don't know exactly how the country is going to collapse, when it will collapse, if it will collapse at all. And
yes, the collapse of America, as ever since a year ago. This has been the narrative now. Is America going to collapse? How is it going to happen? What will happen? Is this going to happen? Is the volume on the video okay, by the way? So, the fall of Rome is one of these things that the conservatives love to talk about. And they love to talk about the fall of Rome because they want to give people the impression that, hey, we're going in that direction where we could fall next because of XYZ. You can insert whatever thing you're afraid of here. It can be CRT, it can be this or that, whatever. All kinds of things. Let's see. What is so? Tell us, Michael Knowles. How is it going to fall? By the way, I love his little intro. The whole thing with the cigar, like looking, trying to look like super cool alpha male in his little intro. But then he comes on the screen. He's wearing this kind of dorky like sweater over a button-down shirt, like kind of strange, but whatever.
There's a big debate on the right now about whether we're in late imperial Rome, late republican Rome. Maybe we're not in Rome at all. One of the clearest, most profound essays I have read on this topic came from my friend, Mike Anton, lecturer in politics and a research fellow at the Hillsdale College's Kirby Center in D.C. Mike is the author of The Stakes. Mike served on the National Security Council staff under President Donald Trump. He's done lots of interesting things. And Mike is going to clarify for us, I hope, exactly what is going to happen next in American politics. Sir, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Unfortunately, the clarity that I can offer is the clarity of saying we don't know.
Okay, so, I mean, eventually I'm sure they're going to come back around to, I'm sure it's going to happen at some point, but, we just don't know yet. Yeah, exactly. Rome fell because women didn't wake up to cook breakfast. That's probably, that's probably not too far off what they're actually going to say. It's probably in that ballpark.
So I am a dabbler, more than a dabbler, in these historical comparisons we all have. In fact, some of the criticisms or commentaries on the article have been, oh, there he goes again talking. It's that done to death Rome comparison.
Right.
But I felt it had to be summarized precisely because it is so done to death and so dominant. We had to acknowledge that, look, this is the comparison everybody wants to make. But my point isn't to say that we're going to follow that track. It was to start by saying there's a reason people make a comparison, because there are a number of similarities. That's not the focus of this article. Focus of this article are the differences, and not just the differences between America and Rome, the differences between what the situation in the United States is today And from what I can tell, the differences between that and anything that's come before. There are things in which you grope to find a historical parallel, and you can't find one. Now, I will preface this. This is you call this false modesty or what you will. I'm not a historian. I did one of my 3 college majors was history. I think I'm above average in historical learning and understanding, but by no means an expert. So I've always, there are a lot of caveats in the articles to say I don't think this has ever happened before. I will state a certain phenomena and then say I can't think of an example of this. If there are people out there
sounds very academically rigorous, doesn't it?
who want to say, no, Anton, here's the point you made on page 19 or whatever, but in fact, there's a direct, the Cappadocian Empire of 378 BC went through exactly this. I'm all ears. I want to hear it. But what I was trying to do was show a series of things that I think are unprecedented, and that because they're unprecedented, they make predictions difficult or impossible. And they put us in a sense uncharted territory. So even the Rome comparison, as apt and useful as it is for many reasons, ultimately can't serve us as a guide.
So for those who have not yet read the entire essay, and I would strongly encourage people to do so because we are awash in a sea of political commentary and most of it's crap, but this one's actually quite illuminating. What exactly is unprecedented about our situation compared to every other historical example?
Well, I believe I begin with immigration, migration, population change.
Nope, here we go. Immigration, migration, population change. So, yeah, I mean, this is... So obviously the first thing they're going to talk about is immigration. Because this goes into the whole replacement theory sort of thing. This dovetails into all of that, like how Western civilization and the United States specifically is going to go under because of all of these migrants and stuff like that. All of these migrants, all of these immigrants, they are going to bring America down. This is not new. People like this have been saying things like this for centuries. This is not even remotely new.
Obviously, that's happened over the years. I mean, you know anything about history, you know that people move around a lot, and not just individuals, but families and tribes, and even almost whole nations can migrate. So this that has happened before. What I point to in this case is the rapidity. Okay, point 1. The sheer number.
Oh, here's the scare. Oh, here's the caravans, guys. Here's the caravans. The caravans of thousands of people streaming for the United States. Yes, that's scary.
Point 2, and to use one of the great buzzwords of our time, the diversity. Point 3. Now, this is before you.
Yes, diversity. Yes, evil diversity.
Before you take a position on the goodness or badness, consequentiality or irrelevance of this, let's just face the facts. I by my count, and it's a rough and dirty count because I'm not a demographer, but I looked at all of the best sources I could find, reputable sources like the Pew Research Center. You count up how many people have come legally since the 1965 Immigration Act changed the U.S. policy. You do your best to estimate how many have come illegally. Then you do your best to estimate, their descendants, and children and grandchildren. And I would say that it's about 100 million over 50 to 55 years. It could be.
So now this is interesting. Now notice what he does here. What he's saying is there's about 100 million people who were either immigrants or the children of immigrants or the grandchildren of immigrants within, I think he said, like a 55-year period or something. He's talking about 3 different generations. A significant percentage of the people he's talking about are second-generation Americans. People whose parents also were born in the United States. And so why this is trying to scare people by saying that less than a third, because the country's about 330 million right now, right? What he's saying is over the course of 55 years, all those people who have come here, is still less than a third of the country. And most of those people have long since been assimilated because they're now, depending on how you want to phrase it, they're second or third generation Americans. But yet this is supposed to be scary, right? He's presenting it as if it's a problem. And really, it's not.
90, it could be 110, but it's about 100 million. In that brief a period has never happened before. You go back to some of the great mass migrations in history, that's just never happened before.
Yeah, partly because the total numbers have not happened before, because the total number of people in the world was a lot smaller back then. There were huge migrations of people in terms of the total percentage of the population centuries and centuries ago. But those are not things that make news, and those are not going to help him prove his point. So of course he'll ignore those.
The other thing is the diversity. So lots of people are coming to the United States, but they're coming from literally everywhere. This has never happened before because the technology wasn't around. So if in the ancient world or in the early medieval world, if you wanted to cross the Danube and go into Italy or go try to see what was left of the Western Roman Empire, you could do that. But you weren't coming from the Central Asian steppes. You weren't coming from sub-Saharan Africa or the cone of South America because there was no way for you to get there. Now you can come from anywhere because transportation is easy by historical standards. And so not only do we have the greatest number of people entering one country over the shortest period of time, we also have the widest variety of sources, and that includes differences in religion, language, culture, outlook, you name it. And
the subtext of here being, we have all of those things, or they are bringing all of those things, and you should be very, very concerned about this.
It's never happened before. Now we're told diversity is our strength, a quote, which, by the way, I have, to the best of my knowledge, found no earlier source for than a Dan Quayle, if you can imagine that, speech from 1992. Well, historically and philosophically, diversity beyond a certain point has not been thought of as a strength. I quote Aristotle's Politics, where he says, look, ethnic conflict basically happens whenever two peoples from a different source get together. And he's talking about differences between Greeks of so fine a shade from our distance, we wouldn't even recognize the difference, right? If we were to say to him, well, Mr. Aristotle, we can one-up you here. We've got three Abrahamic faiths, and then we've got Eastern faiths, and then we've got people of no faith, or this.
So what he's also saying here is, and this is something that conservatives do a lot, they try to say, well, ethnic conflict is natural, and it's expected. And to an extent, sure. I mean, you would expect that there could be some issues with different ethnicities being put together, but it's not something that is entirely inherent. If you are a person or a people who are considerate and also very, very specifically concerned with not having ethnic conflict, it can be done under the right circumstances, even any decent circumstances. But if you have people that are trying to fan the flames of that sort of thing, then yeah, it can of course be a problem. But that's not really what he's saying here. What he's saying here is, isn't this weird? Isn't this potentially dangerous? I mean, remember, what he's talking about is the potential fall of the United States as Rome fell. And so this is the kind of scaremongering that he's engaging in, or about to engage in.
And then we get into the linguistic stuff, which makes the Tower of Babel look like an average high school that offers Spanish and French, and that's about it. He would be astonished and say, I don't know how this is going to work out.
There's a funny moment in Dante when Dante is going up to heaven, and he meets with his one illustrious ancestor from whom he gets his family name, and this is the one guy, Cacciaguida. And Cacciaguida, who is in heaven, he's saved, he's a saint, he laments how everything was better in Florence before all the immigrants came in. And it's a little bit of a politically incorrect moment, but that would be the historical understanding of things.
Okay, and this is apparently to Michael Knowles, this is highly relevant today because I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I mean, look, people like to quote, well, I like to quote Machiavelli, but on this specific point, Machiavelli praises immigration as one of the sources of strength that made Rome great. Basically, he's pretty blunt about this, though. It was because of the manpower. Just needed a lot of people to put together these big armies and go around and conquer the world. But if you read him a little more carefully, he also says this really changed ultimately the republican character of ancient Rome. So there's a parallel that may be apt for us. I just think, like I said, I start off with the number, the speed, and the diversity, and I don't think that that's ever happened before. I go into the character of our ruling class, which I'm not a fan of. I think I've made that plain enough in various writings and podcasts and other talks. But a rapacious elite that doesn't serve the interests of the people it governs, that's not new. I mean, that's happened before.
I mean, he worked for Trump, who, in terms of elite, I mean, does it get, if you're gonna complain about the elite, is a guy like Trump a guy that inherited basically at least hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars from his dad? I mean, is that not elite? It's funny, they're very, very concerned about the elites when it is those other people. But then when it's people that he even worked for, he worked for one of these elites. But of course, those elites that he worked for and the Republicans and everything, they're the good people, right? They're not ones that they're not the cause of the problems, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's the particular character of our elite that I'm not sure has ever happened before. I was just reading last.
Oh yeah, and showing Nancy Pelosi as the elite. Meanwhile, he worked for Trump, who has allegedly at least way more money than Pelosi. But of course, Pelosi is the problem.
Night again, because I think I'm going to do a class on this. Xenophon's Cyropaedia and some of the commentaries, and then I went through a passage in Xenophon's Hiero, where Hiero has to say, no tyrant wants a healthy people. You got to kind of keep them down. You got to keep them half broken, because the healthy people are the ones that are going to come and overthrow you. But all right, yeah, that's fairly common. But I mean, has any tyrant ever pushed, transgenderism and some?
Oh, here we go. Transgenderism. Throws that in there. Like, have they been pushing? Yes, we all want you, Mike Anton, to be trans. That's what trans people want. Like, who's pushing transgenderism? It's a very funny thing how they talk about this as if it's a movement to try to turn people trans. It is very, very strange.
So many of the crazy things that are being pushed on us today, and we're demanded to accept them before. This is new. I mean, popular manias, they've certainly happened before. But the types and the speed with which these things are happening, they seem new to me. And the determination, the current ruling class is going well beyond what it needs to do to keep the people unwilling or unlikely to rise up and revolt against them, and seems to want to punish them in a punitive way that I don't have a whole lot of historical antecedents for that I can draw on.
There does seem to be a kind of masochism
Of course, he doesn't say what those punishments are, or like what he's very short on the details there. He just says, well, they're punishing them by doing what? By what exactly? Like, who is doing what exactly? There's a lot of very vague language going on here.
Well, and this is hard to wrap one's mind around, which is that it's not merely the elite pushing all these sorts of pathologies on the plebs and on all of the... They're pushing them on themselves in a way, too. When the largely white liberal ruling class pushes anti-white racism through critical race theory or whatever other phenomenon.
Yep, there we go. And of course, so whenever you're doing one of these sorts of things, like with Michael Knowles, when he's talking about the trouble with American society, it's almost like you've got to hit all the check marks. you've got to talk about immigrants. You've got to talk about how immigrants are a problem, and then you've got to talk about how people are anti-white, and then there's all these CRT reference. You got to make sure to mention that. It's like a who's who check mark of like what all these things are.
Presumably, at some point, this is going to come back to haunt them. When they push the radical gender theories, many of their own children have fallen prey to that.
That many of their own children have fallen prey to these radical gender theories, like people being transgender, which there have been transgender people for thousands of years. It's just now getting more attention because it has become more accepted, and so many of the people who otherwise centuries ago or even decades or even years ago would not have come out and been transgender, now that it is more societally acceptable. And then they're saying, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to live my truth as it is. And of course, someone like Michael Knowles is going to see that as an affront, because he ultimately does not believe transgender people should be seen as moral equals. He sees them as mentally ill or mentally deficient or something like along those lines. So that's, of course, what he has to say.
So what are they thinking?
I don't know. I puzzle over this a lot. I think I say in the article that and it's exactly what you say. This is kind of in a sense, it's an intra-white fight. A largely white ruling class hates a largely or an even more mostly white middle or working class, and so in order to attack them, condemns the whole white race, and then tries to exempt itself. But they
and this whole thing of anti-white racism, this is the drumbeat that they're hitting. They want to let you know that anytime they are talking about lifting another race up who perhaps has not had the opportunity to have what white people have in this country, that is a problem for them. And so they have to turn it around and say, well, that's actually unfair to white people. This is the typical stuff. I mean, everybody that is watching this sure has seen this before.
You don't have a coherent or convincing reason why this doesn't apply to them. You're just supposed to sort of know that if you hold the right opinions, if you went to the right school, if you work in the right job, if you live in the right blue metro area, you're okay. You're not a bad person. But if they were to spell it out, if there's this group over here that's bad and we're okay, they know that somehow that doesn't work rhetorically, and they can't make it sound consistent. And they also know that many of the people to whom their hateful rhetoric appeals don't want to hear a distinction. They want the blanket condemnation. So they give them that red meat blanket condemnation.
And notice, too, that there's nothing about policy here. This isn't about policy at all. All it is just saying, these people hate you because you're white. These elites, which, again, he worked for one of the elitist of the elite, and he's saying that it's the elites that are doing this. So
that's probably the wrong phrase to use. Some of these people are probably eating soy, but whatever.
Did you catch that? So he says something about red meat, right? And then he says, "Oh, these people are eating soy." These are memes from like 4 years ago or 5 years ago that he's throwing out there. I mean, he's a boomer, so I guess he could be maybe could be forgiven for coming up with that. But
they give him that blanket confirmation, and then they just try to pretend that it doesn't count to us. And I say exactly what you just said, which is they're banking on a hope that this will never turn around and bite them, that this will not blow back on them in any way. And for the most part, so far, it hasn't. Although you could say it kind of is, right? I mean, these ruling class citadels are the ones suffering the most. You wouldn't want to be in Chicago right now.
Right.
They always mention Chicago. Anytime they talk about cities that are like a failed city or something like that, it's always Chicago. It doesn't matter.
Not the heart of the ruling class, but Manhattan certainly is. San Francisco certainly is. And these places are suffering badly from crime, from home.
as opposed to any other time in the history of cities anywhere. This is the typical sort of city mouse, country mouse kind of thing. Republicans always love to play up that these societal problems are worse in cities But of course, a ton of people live in cities, and a lot of the wealth of this country, a huge percentage of the wealth in this country, is being generated in cities. So that's where a lot of people are. And they say, well, all these problems, they magnify all these problems and say, oh, this is because of Democrat policies or whatever. But then when you mention the financial aspect of it, like, well, why then is all of the wealth coming from cities? Isn't that business? Isn't that like capitalism? Isn't that what you want? And then they'll be like, well, that's the Republican governor or something. There's always some way to backtrack that.
Homelessness, from the mentally ill and the drug addicted on the streets, from antisocial behavior of all types, and precisely because they don't have a coherent way to convey this. Well, we're exempt from this judgment, but you're not. They've now, they used to be better hypocrites. That is to say, it used to be that the ruling class would say, yes, we need bail reform, we need criminal justice reform, we need all of this stuff, but not in Manhattan. Manhattan needs 40,000. New York City needs 40,000 cops, a strong jail system, serious district attorneys, and we've got to get everything under control. Even though that was hypocritical and their logic didn't lead you there, they would say it anyway. Now they're so bought into their own arguments that they watch as their own citadels get torched, and they go, yeah, I can't, I have nothing to say against it. I can't even be a hypocrite and oppose that.
And that, of course, is a reference to the BLM protests, and of course, they of course call it the BLM riots because there were some percentage of people out of the tens of millions, literally, who took to the street during the BLM protests. There was some violence and some property destruction. So they're like, well, this was all their fault, and etc. The usual.
It's a marvel to watch. They're not yet waking up.
To what degree, you alluded to this earlier, to what degree is this a technological problem? Meaning, you couldn't have had the largest migration of people ever in human history before the technology permitted it. And on the other side of that, one of the things that we hear, one of the great praises we hear of all this modern upheaval is, well, at least you've got your iPhones. We live in this modern, we have the metaverse, we have video games, we have robots injecting you with things. We have all the...
Wait, you have robots injecting you with things? I'm not aware of... I'm not aware of what maybe he's talking about some science fiction movie. Robots injecting you with things.
Wonderments of technology. So how do we grapple with that?
Well, grapple with it. The real expert on this, who you should talk to, is James Poulos, right, who I will say testified before Congress, I guess late last week, and got kudos from the members of Congress who understood him, which sadly, given the quality of members of Congress, probably wasn't as many as we would like. Nonetheless, these technology does a couple things. One is I don't think, or at least I suspect, that it would not be possible for wokeness and this kind of mental pathology to be as virulent and as widespread.
Wow, it actually took it took over 13 minutes in this video for them to say wokeness. That's actually, I have to give them props for that. I mean, usually that's mentioned in the first 3 minutes of one of these types of videos. Wokeness. I mean, they're just getting to it, less than it's almost halfway through the video, and they're just getting to the wokeness bit. Okay.
As it is, absent social media, which is a relatively new phenomenon in even in our own lives. I mean, there's no social media when I'm a kid.
Yeah.
In fact, it's often pointed out, people around my age will be the last generation to grow up entirely untouched by this. It comes around only when you're an adult, and therefore it didn't really get its hooks into you.
Yeah.
Well, everybody born after a certain point never knew a world without it. And it completely shaped the way that they look at things. Another aspect, though, of the phone and of the screens, which I do point out in the piece, is it's an attempt by the regime, for lack of a better term, to just drug us. It's like
now we're getting to some real conspiracy theory stuff here. I mean, so it's not enough that corporations are simply doing this to make money, because that's the point of corporations, especially to the people who are running them. They just want more clicks and more money and more whatever. There has to be this overarching theme of this is what the elites want. So this is as close as this is closer to the whole almost Illuminati-esque kind of thing that they're talking about here.
Inflation is really high, crime is up. You're not going to get the kind of job you want. Your degree is worthless.
So they're not going to get the number of openings that they have right now for jobs is tremendously high. There's a huge number of people and a huge number of businesses out there who are looking for employees. So for them to come say that your degree is worthless, you can't find a job, like, that's entirely not true. I mean, I'm in a knowledge industry, and we are definitely hiring. So I don't understand what they're talking about here.
Well, we're going to make it up to you with streaming and screens and scrolling, and the more you're preoccupied with that, this gets back to the point. This is sort of precedented, right? This gets back to Hiero's point. I want to put the citizenry to sleep so that they don't come after me. Well, in the ancient world, you couldn't do it with screens. In the modern world, you can. So there are aspects to the screens that I think have historical precedent, and there are aspects that don't.
Well, it does make you wonder too, if the great achievement of the age is all the streams and the tweets and the likes and sending you all sorts of weird, creepy, sexualized images. How productive is that? When I think of the technological innovation of the vacuum cleaner, that seems to be much more productive than Twitter.
That's definitely true. I intuit, I can't say I know, but I intuit that we're living through actually a pretty non-productive age, and one of the reasons why everything feels so fake and the
no, this is actually not true at all. Our productivity has been going up for years and years, like pretty consistently. It's been going up quite quickly, and this is just insane. Like, for him to say, like, we're not productive. Like, as a country, as a society, we're incredibly productive and becoming more so all the time because of that technology in large part.
Economy has to be, jerry-rigged in certain ways, and the numbers fudged and pumped up with fiat money and all of this is because there really isn't any.
Right, and this is the sort of just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and be like, oh well, it's all funny money, and it's all, so anytime someone says the economy is good, they'll say, oh well, the numbers are fudged and blah 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 blah. But of course, a few years ago when he was working for Trump, I don't think he would have been singing that tune. When the economy was also going up at that time, he would have, of course, not said that.
The underlying productivity going on, or very little. All this prosperity kind of feels ephemeral and illusory, and it's possible that the inflation that we're now enduring, and which is apparently slated to get a lot worse, is a sign of that.
Apparently slated to get a lot worse. I have not heard that. Slated by who?
Those kinds of things, though, have precedence. Let me get back to something you said earlier, which is this self-loathing is unprecedented. I struggled to find. I've found plenty of historical examples of nations that fell or just sort of went through a long decline. This mass hatred, and it's not just in the United States. You're seeing it in Europe, in certain countries or parts of certain countries. You're seeing it around the world. I don't know that that's ever happened before.
And so this is interesting. What he's talking about here is, when he says self-hatred, this is things like reckoning, like having race reckonings, like reckonings of our treatment of racial minorities and of various other people. And this is also the same thing that's going on in Europe to some extent, yes. But what he's saying here is that this means that it's self-loathing. He says to us, saying, okay, we're going to re-examine how we treat racial issues. And to him, he's saying, oh, that's CRT, that's bad, that's, we don't want to do that, that's, this is the greatest country in the world. That is the kind of thing that he's talking about here.
I mentioned the fertility rates at one point. When have not just one country, but a dozen or 24 countries ever had fertility rates so far below replacement that demographers are talking about potential extinction? I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Oh yeah. So here we go about the Great Replacement. First of all, this is two things. He's fear-mongering about, what he's saying here is basically the white-collar version of they will not, of like, Jews will not replace us kind of thing, like the Charlottesville guys with the tiki torches, right? This is all is this is just another version of that. It's just the more white collar version of that. Is, oh, like, it's replacement theory and all these people are, there's not going to be as many white people and stuff like that. This is what he's talking about. So yeah. And yes, I agree, Hamstray, that things like Bitcoin, Bitcoin, it's generating something like, I think I mentioned this before, or something like the entire country of Denmark, like, that's the amount of energy that it's taking every year to mine Bitcoin. That's it. That's a huge amount just from Bitcoin, which doesn't seem like a great idea. And yeah, and Rebel Woody, exactly. Birth rates always go down when when a country economically develops, and that is something that we are seeing now with other countries. So he's saying, oh, this is a bad thing that all these industrialized or Western countries or whatever, the birth rates are going down to below replacement level. But even the below replacement level, he's like, oh, they might be facing extinction. Like, okay, so your replacement levels at like what, 99% per generation. So the birth rate is like 1.8 or 1.9 children per woman or something like that. That's how they measure these things typically, and that is going to lead to extinction. Like, no, and also, it's not really such a bad thing that the overall population is going down. That's really not bad at all. So, looking at what we're doing to the world, that's not really a terrible thing.
Anything can happen, and things may turn around, but it's bizarre and kind of scary to watch. You see rises.
Yeah, you are scared. I am not. But yes, I agree. I'm sure that you are scared. Yeah, I believe you.
And falls depending on material considerations, external considerations, political considerations. But I don't think we've ever seen an extended period of such low rates in so many countries all at the same time like we're seeing today.
But what you're describing, Mike, is a situation where the native populations of a number of countries, and notably our own, is declining rapidly. And there is simultaneously a massive wave of migration from all over.
The native populations. You could pretty much translate that to white.
The world. But I was just recently reading the SPLC and reading MSNBC and CNN, and I am told that is a wild, racist, evil conspiracy theory called the Great Replacement. How dare you?
Unless they say it.
Unless,
and then it's okay.
That's true, because they do admit it.
That they say we're replacing you because you're bad, that's great.
No, see, what he's got wrong here, of course, is when they're saying that that demographic changes happen, we're like, okay, that's fine. Maybe that's natural. It's just going to be what it is. But it's these guys, it's the right-wing reactionaries that are like, oh, this is explicitly a bad thing. Like, this is the difference. So the difference is not saying like, oh, it isn't happening that the percentage of people who are not white is going up. It's the reaction to it. And these guys are very much of the opinion that shouldn't happen, and they think that that's very frightening. That's going to happen. We could shut down immigration tomorrow, completely, and there would still be a higher birth rate among people who are non-white. So even that is not going to change anything. But yeah, this is what they're worried about.
I say, so you're replacing me because I'm bad? They say, how dare you? Right? This is one of the things that I find, propaganda has also been around forever, but the techniques that they're using now, I don't know that have precedent. Essentially, they require you to lie on their behalf, right? So, Michael, we're going to replace you. Wait, you're going to replace me? Michael, I didn't say that. How dare you? Now tell me Immediately after I say it, your response should be, "You never said it." Okay, repeat after me.
Okay, and this is just dumb, but this whole replacing somebody. Okay, they're taking what they're considering replacement by saying like, oh, there are going to be fewer people who look like you. There are going to be fewer white people, and then they're saying they're changing the definition just subtly here. They're changing the definition to they're not just replacing you demographically. They're specifically replacing you, and like trying to make that even more scary. And yeah, that's interesting.
Michael, I'm going to replace you. Your response is, "You're not going to replace me." That's what they expect us to do, and they punish us if we don't play along.
There was an article, I forget if it was in the New York Times or Washington Post. I guess there have been actually many articles to this effect.
Yeah.
But there was one I remember in particular where the headline was, "Yes, we are replacing you."
No, it was "We can replace them."
Yeah, that's right.
It's still there, and I think the Michelle Goldberg was the author, and she will be one of the first to condemn you if you quoting their own words back to them is a sin. Now, this is a phenomena that I've looked at in other venues and tried to explain. They have a messaging problem. I'm actually writing about this right now, and I haven't finished the piece. They have a messaging problem, which is that part of their message is to rile up their shock troops. Again, this is part of what the
Oh, here we go. And so now he's using a Nazi comparison, like shock troops. They're getting the shock troops whipped up to go against the white people, that's just precious.
What the really virulent anti-white rhetoric is about is just rile up the shock troops, and that could include non-whites who are anti-white, but also some whites who really have taken it. They've drunk the Kool-Aid and they believe whiteness is bad, and that they're guilty of original sin by.
Okay, so a sign that says "Wake up, white America," and then show up. That's anti-white. I don't know how that is. How is that hurting any white people by saying, okay, I think that we should give an equal level of rights to minorities, and then they're of course saying that is like, oh, they got to wake up, white America, that's like a bad thing. So yeah, that's interesting.
Being born of this particular race, they need to use that rhetoric to rile up their base. But it's hard to do that in private so that others don't hear it and think, wow, that sounds like anti-white hatred. That sounds kind of racist. So they can't not say it. They just have to condemn you for noticing and for saying it back. So that's part of the rhetorical ploy. We get to say it. You don't get to say it. In fact, we require you to deny that we said it.
This seems unstable, and I suppose it is unstable, and you see that breakout in the inability to control some of the riots and things that were in no small part racial last year. And actually, speaking of those riots, you've mentioned George Floyd, the patron saint of contemporary leftism, as an emblem of this movement.
George Floyd is the patron saint of contemporary leftism. That's very interesting, Michael Knowles.
Movement, and also as unprecedented.
Well, look, I said whichever position one takes about the specific circumstances of his death and the outcome of the trial, right? And the official position, the only one, this is a basically catechism for the regime at this point, is he was murdered. He was an innocent lamb who was murdered. That's it. You are not allowed to have any other opinion. Okay.
Oh, he was no angel, right?
Even if you accept that insistence by the regime, as I think I put it in the article, one would have to say that George Floyd did not live his life in a way to make such a death improbable. That is to say, you can go back and it's in the public record.
Yep, he was no angel. He was no angel, everyone. Don't forget, he was no angel. Right. Okay, interesting.
As much as they try to suppress it, and it can't all be suppressed. So essentially, it's taboo to talk about his life. You can't mention all the convictions. You can't mention all the arrests. You can't mention many of the crimes and many of the very bad things that he did, because only a bad person would mention that. But they're out there. And I say, if you look at all of this, even if you think he was completely innocent in the circumstance at which he did die, the ridiculous, I find, response to his death. And tragic response to his death. Cities burned, lives lost, a crime wave that we're still in the midst of a year and a half later that shows
So the crime wave that we're in now is apparently a result of the BLM protests. So that's the line they're going with. That, like, no, it has of course nothing to do with COVID or anything else. It's, it's all because of the BLM protests, and also framing it as a he. Did you hear that framing earlier where he said something about, like, oh, it was sort of a race riot? Like, no, that's not what a race riot is. It wasn't like white people against black people. You saw in the protests there were millions upon millions of white people and black people marching together, and that's not what actually happened. But of course it makes it sound much more scary, and their entire purpose here is to try to get white people upset or fearful about what could be coming.
As yet, no signs of slowing down. But also, if you remember, he got the equivalent of like 3 state funerals drawn in horse-drawn carriages with celebrities
with
everywhere.
Joe Biden in attendance.
Thousands of people. I mean, this is like, I could sort of get it. Bob Dole just died. He lay in state in the Capitol and then went to the National Cathedral. All right, somebody like that who served his country honorably in war, was a senior statesman, a presidential candidate. You sort of get those levels of honors for a person like Bob Dole. For George Floyd, and to whom statues have been erected around the country, murals painted around the country.
The murals are not for George Floyd as an individual. The murals are in remembrance to what was sparked by his death, and of course they know that. But this is all part of the he was no angel defense, as with everything else. So yeah, this is. Very, 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 very nice. That quite interesting analysis there by Michael Knowles and Mike Anton, the guy that, again, used to work for Trump and is complaining about elites. So, right. And yeah, and as Derpalon just said, it doesn't matter what Floyd's history was, the cops didn't have cause to use the force they did. It's not their job to go around being Judge Dredd. Exactly. Their purpose is to bring people in alive, unless it's absolutely impossible to do so. Otherwise, you bring them in, and then they'll face the consequences, face trial, whatever it is that needs to happen. Yep. And yeah, as Revel Woody said, why are they so afraid that whites being a minority would destroy our culture? Minority cultures are thriving. If you have to be a majority to sustain your culture, that's a weak culture. Very well said. And I agree. And if we white people are so boring that other cultures overtake us and other cultures become more popular than us and have more children and things are thriving, great, have at it. I mean, that's fantastic. I think that's a good thing. So, it's not even a thing.